Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist. Tonight, we're embarking on a journey through the most complex structure in the known universe, the human brain. 3 pounds of soft tissue that somehow creates every thought you've ever had, every memory you treasure, every dream that visits you in the night. We'll wander through its corridors gently, exploring how it builds your reality, stores your past, and imagines futures that haven't happened yet. Think of this as a quiet conversation about the organ that makes you you. And just before we begin, if these calm, curious explorations help you unwind or give you a quiet way to end your day, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. What makes the human brain so special? Consider this for a moment. Every animal has a brain of some kind. A sparrow navigating thousands of miles, a dolphin recognizing itself in a mirror, an octopus solving puzzles with arms that think independently. But the human brain stands apart in certain ways. It's not the largest. Whales have brains weighing nearly 20 pounds. It's not the most complex relative to body size. Some shrews beat us there. What makes it special is proportion and architecture. Our cerebral cortex, the wrinkled outer layer, is extraordinarily developed. It's where abstract thinking happens, where we ponder mortality and meaning, where we create art and mathematics and philosophy. We're the only species that asks why we exist. The human brain takes longer to mature than any other animals, remaining plastic and adaptable well into our 20s. This extended development allows for incredible learning capacity. We don't just adapt to our environment, we adapt our environment to us, and we teach the next generation to do the same. In essence, the human brain is special because it knows it's special and wonders what that means. How does the brain actually work? Imagine an orchestra with 86 billion musicians, each playing their part in perfect coordination. That's closer to how your brain works than any simple metaphor can capture. At its foundation, the brain operates through electrical and chemical signals, traveling along networks of cells called neurons. These signals form patterns, and those patterns become thoughts, movements, sensations, and memories. Different regions specialize in different tasks. The occipital lobe at the back processes what you see. The temporal lobes on the sides handle sound and memory. The frontal lobe behind your forehead plans, decides, and gives you personality. But here's the beautiful complexity. Nothing works in isolation. When you bite into an apple, taste centers activate alongside memory regions that recall other apples, texture processors that feel the crunch, and reward systems that decide if you want another bite. The brain works through collaboration, millions of tiny conversations happening simultaneously, creating the seamless experience of being you. It's a symphony that never stops playing, even when you sleep. How many neurons are inside your head? The number is almost incomprehensible. Roughly 86 billion neurons reside in your brain. To put that in perspective, if you counted 1 neuron per second without stopping, it would take you nearly 3,000 years to count them all. That's more neurons than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy, all packed into the space of a large grapefruit. Not all brains have the same distribution, though. About 69 billion neurons cluster in your cerebellum, the structure at your brain's base that coordinates movement and balance. The remaining 17 billion spread throughout your cerebral cortex, where conscious thought emerges. But raw numbers don't tell the whole story. What matters more is how these neurons connect. Each neuron can form thousands of connections with its neighbors, creating an estimated 100 trillion synapses. If neurons are the musicians, synapses are the conversations between them. This vast network allows for nearly infinite patterns of activity, giving rise to everything from your childhood memories to your ability to imagine dragons or understand calculus. Your brain contains multitudes, literally. What do neurons really do? At their heart, neurons are messengers. They receive information, process it, and pass it along. Each neuron has a cell body, branching arms called dendrites that listen for incoming signals, and a long tail called an axon that sends signals outward. Think of a neuron as a tiny decision maker, constantly weighing input from thousands of neighbors. When enough signals arrive at the right moment, the neuron fires, sending an electrical pulse down its axon to influence other neurons. Some neurons sense the outside world, light hitting your retina, vibrations reaching your inner ear, pressure on your skin. Others integrate information, combining multiple inputs to recognize patterns like a familiar face or a melody. Still others command action, telling muscles to contract or glands to release hormones. But neurons do more than relay information mechanically. They adapt based on experience, strengthening connections that get used frequently and pruning those that don't. This makes them learning machines, constantly updating their response patterns. In a very real sense, your neurons are writing the story of your life in their connection patterns, one signal at a time. How do neurons communicate with each other? The conversation between neurons is a delicate dance of chemistry and electricity. When a neuron fires, an electrical signal races down its axon like lightning through a wire. But here's where it gets interesting. Neurons don't actually touch each other. There's a tiny gap between them called a synapse, usually about 20 nanometers wide, roughly 1/2000th the width of a human hair. When the electrical signal reaches the end of the axon, it can't jump the gap on its own. Instead, it triggers the release of chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. These molecules drift across the synaptic gap, like bottles with messages, landing on receptors on the neighboring neuron's dendrites. If enough neurotransmitters bind to enough receptors, they change the receiving neuron's electrical state, making it more or less likely to fire. It's a translation from electrical to chemical and back to electrical again. This two-step process might seem inefficient, but it's actually brilliant. It allows for modulation, for signals to be amplified or dampened, for learning to happen through chemical changes. Your thoughts are patterns of these chemical conversations, billions happening every second. What are synapses, and why are they important? Synapses are where the magic happens, where neurons meet without touching, where information transforms from one cell's output into another's input. These microscopic junctions are the fundamental units of learning and memory. When you practice piano, synapses between motor neurons strengthen. When you study a language, new synaptic connections form in language centers. The beauty of synapses lies in their adaptability. A synapse isn't fixed. It can become stronger or weaker based on use. When two neurons fire together repeatedly, the synapse connecting them becomes more efficient, requiring less stimulation to transmit a signal. Neuroscientists summarize this with the phrase, cells that fire together, wire together. This is how skills become automatic, how facts embed in memory, how habits form. Conversely, synapses that aren't used gradually weaken and may disappear altogether. This pruning keeps your brain efficient, preventing it from cluttering with every fleeting experience. You have about 100 trillion synapses, and their pattern at any moment, which are strong, which are weak, which exist at all, defines who you are. Change your synapses, and you change yourself. How fast can the brain send a signal? The speed varies dramatically, depending on the type of neuron involved. Some signals race along at over 250 miles per hour, faster than a Formula One car. These lightning-quick transmissions happen in neurons wrapped in a fatty substance called myelin, which acts like insulation on a wire, allowing electrical signals to jump between gaps rather than traveling continuously. These are the neurons that tell your hand to pull away from a hot stove before you consciously register pain. Other signals move more slowly, crawling at just over half a mile per hour in unmyelinated neurons. These slower pathways often carry information about dull aches or ambient sensations, that don't require instant response. The variation in speed allows your brain to prioritize urgent information while still processing background data. What's remarkable is that despite these speeds, your subjective experience of consciousness feels seamless and instantaneous. You don't notice the tiny delays as signals travel from your eyes to your visual cortex or from your decision centers to your muscles. Your brain constructs a unified now from events that technically happen at slightly different times, stitching reality together faster than you can perceive the seams. What is brain plasticity? Plasticity is the brain's superpower, its ability to change its own structure based on experience. The term comes from the word plastic, meaning moldable, shapeable. For decades, scientists believed the adult brain was fixed, that neurons you were born with slowly died off and were never replaced, that learning was primarily a childhood phenomenon. That turned out to be beautifully wrong. Your brain remains plastic throughout life, constantly rewiring itself in response to what you do, think, and experience. Learn to juggle, and the motor regions controlling your hands literally grow denser with new connections. Meditate regularly, and areas involved in attention and emotional regulation thicken. Lose your sight, and visual cortex regions repurpose themselves to process sound and touch with extraordinary sensitivity. This plasticity operates at multiple scales. Individual synapses strengthen or weaken within minutes. Entire networks reorganize over weeks or months. In rare cases, if one brain region is damaged, neighboring regions can sometimes take over its functions, especially in younger brains. Plasticity is why rehabilitation works, why education matters at any age, why your brain at 60 isn't doomed to be the same as at 30. You are constantly becoming. Can the brain rewire itself? The answer is a resounding yes, though the process has limits and requires the right conditions. Your brain rewires itself every day, in small ways, strengthening neural pathways you use frequently and pruning those you neglect. This happens automatically as you live your life. But larger scale rewiring, recovering from a stroke, overcoming a phobia, or mastering a complex new skill requires deliberate, repeated effort. The key is neuroplasticity, which we touched on earlier. When you consistently practice something new, you're forcing neurons to form new connections and strengthen specific pathways. At first, this feels difficult and awkward because the neural infrastructure isn't there yet. But with repetition, those pathways become more efficient and the skill starts feeling natural. The brain can even rewire around damage. Stroke patients who lose speech abilities can sometimes recover by training other brain regions to take over language functions. Children who have an entire hemisphere removed to treat severe epilepsy can often develop relatively normally as the remaining hemisphere compensates. The younger the brain, the more flexible this rewiring, but it never stops entirely. The brain you have today isn't the one you'll have next year if you challenge it, teach it, and give it new experiences to wire around. How does the brain learn new skills? Learning a skill is like carving a path through a forest. The first time through, you're pushing through undergrowth, stumbling over roots, unsure of the way. Each subsequent journey along the same route makes it easier, clearer, until eventually there's a well-worn trail you can follow without thinking. In your brain, learning begins with attention. When you focus on a new task, playing a chord on guitar, conjugating a verb in Spanish, solving a type of math problem, relevant neurons fire together in new patterns. Initially, these patterns are weak and require conscious effort to maintain. Your prefrontal cortex, the executive region behind your forehead, works hard to coordinate this unfamiliar activity. With practice, something remarkable happens. The connections between those neurons strengthen through repeated firing. Myelin begins wrapping around the axons involved, speeding up signal transmission. The pattern becomes more efficient, requiring less energy and less conscious oversight. Eventually, the skill transfers from effortful conscious processing to more automatic systems in deeper brain structures. This is why you can drive while holding a conversation or type without looking at your hands. The skill has carved its neural pathway deep enough that it runs smoothly without constant supervision. What happens when you form a memory? Memory formation is a transformation, a process of converting fleeting experience into lasting change. It begins with encoding, the moment your brain decides something is worth remembering. Sensory information, the sight of a sunset, the taste of birthday cake, the feeling of accomplishment, arrives at various brain regions. If the experience is significant enough, emotionally charged, or repeatedly encountered, the hippocampus gets involved. This seahorse-shaped structure deep in your brain acts as a memory librarian, helping to consolidate new experiences into lasting storage. During encoding, neurons that fire together in response to the experience begin forming new synaptic connections or strengthening existing ones. The pattern of which neurons fire together creates a unique signature for that memory. Later, during sleep especially, the hippocampus replays these patterns, gradually transferring them to the cortex for long-term storage. This process, called consolidation, can take days or even years. The memory becomes distributed across multiple brain regions, visual details in visual cortex, emotional tone in the amygdala, contextual information in various association areas. When you later recall the memory, your brain reactivates this distributed pattern. In essence, remembering is reconstructing the original experience from neural blueprints. How are memories stored in the brain? Here's a truth that might unsettle you. There's no memory warehouse in your brain, no filing cabinet where experiences sit unchanged. Instead, memories are stored as patterns of synaptic connections distributed throughout the cortex. A single memory, say your first day of school, exists as a specific configuration of strengthened synapses across multiple brain regions. The visual details live in visual cortex, the emotions in the amygdala and prefrontal regions, the narrative sequence in areas that process time and causation. When you remember that day, your brain reactivates this distributed network, bringing the pattern back to life. This explains why memories are reconstructive rather than reproductive. You're not playing back a recording, you're rebuilding an approximation based on the current state of those synaptic connections. Each time you remember something, you're actually altering it slightly, like making a copy of a copy. Memories can strengthen with recall, but they can also incorporate new information or be influenced by current emotions. Some synaptic changes that encode memories are structural, new dendritic spines growing, existing synapses becoming larger. Others are chemical, proteins being synthesized that make synapses more efficient. Your memories are written into the physical structure of your brain. Can we ever truly forget something? Forgetting feels like loss, but it's actually a feature, not a bug. Your brain constantly makes decisions about what to keep and what to let fade. Some forgetting is simply a failure of retrieval. The memory exists, but you can't access it in the moment. It's like a book misplaced in a library. The information is there, but you can't find the right shelf. Other forgetting is genuine decay. When memories aren't retrieved or reinforced, the synaptic connections encoding them gradually weaken through a process called synaptic pruning. Neurotransmitter receptors get recycled, dendritic spines shrink and disappear, and eventually the pattern that was that memory simply dissolves back into the brain's general architecture. This is necessary. Remembering everything would be overwhelming and inefficient. Your brain prioritizes information that seems important, emotionally significant, or frequently used. But can something be truly permanently forgotten? The answer is probably yes for most ordinary memories, though some evidence suggests even forgotten experiences might leave faint traces that could influence behavior without conscious awareness. Traumatic memories, in particular, can be difficult to erase completely, sometimes resurfacing unexpectedly. The brain's preference is for flexibility, holding on to what matters, releasing what doesn't, but the line between remembered and forgotten isn't always clean. How does the brain create dreams? Dreams emerge from the brain's nighttime activity, particularly during REM sleep, when your eyes move rapidly beneath closed lids and your body lies paralyzed. During REM, your brain becomes almost as active as when you're awake, but the pattern of activity is different. The prefrontal cortex, which handles logic and self-awareness, quiets down while sensory and emotional regions fire wildly. The brainstem sends random signals upward, and your cortex does what it always does, tries to make sense of the input. Without external sensory data to ground it, your brain weaves narratives from memory fragments, recent experiences, emotional concerns, and pure randomness. This is why dreams feel bizarre, yet emotionally real. Why your dead grandmother might appear in your childhood home, eating breakfast with a celebrity you've never met. There's no logical editor insisting the story makes sense. Some researchers believe dreams serve a function, processing emotions, consolidating memories, or problem solving. Others suggest they're merely the brain's interpretation of neural noise, meaning searching for meaning where none exists. What's certain is that dreams are the brain talking to itself, creating a private theater where normal rules don't apply. What do dreams actually mean? The question of dream meaning has occupied humans for millennia, and the honest answer is we're still not entirely sure. Sigmund Freud famously argued that dreams represent disguised wishes, symbolic expressions of unconscious desires. Carl Jung saw them as communications from the collective unconscious, filled with archetypal symbols. Modern neuroscience offers different perspectives. Some researchers view dreams as the brain's way of consolidating memories, replaying and sorting through the day's experiences to decide what to keep. Others see them as emotional regulation, a safe space where the brain processes feelings without real-world consequences. There's also the activation synthesis hypothesis, which suggests dreams are simply the cortex's attempt to create coherent stories from random neural firing during sleep, essentially meaningless noise given narrative structure. The truth might be that dreams serve multiple functions and don't have a single universal meaning. That anxiety dream about showing up unprepared for an exam might reflect actual stress, or it might be your brain randomly activating education-related memories. What seems clear is that dreams reflect your brain's concerns, experiences, and neural architecture, even if not in the straightforward symbolic way earlier thinkers believed. Why do we forget our dreams so quickly? You wake with vivid dream memories that seem unforgettable, yet within minutes they've evaporated like morning mist. This peculiar forgetting happens because dreams aren't processed the same way as waking experiences. During REM sleep, your brain's chemistry changes significantly. Norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter crucial for forming lasting memories, drops to nearly zero. The hippocampus, your memory encoding specialist, remains active during dreams, but without sufficient norepinephrine, its ability to transfer dream content into long-term storage is compromised. Dreams are being experienced, but not efficiently encoded. Additionally, the transition from sleep to waking disrupts the brain state that held the dream. It's like a drawing in sand that waves wash away. The pattern existed, but lacked permanence. If you wake during or immediately after a REM period and rehearse the dream in your mind, speaking it aloud or writing it down, you can sometimes capture it before it fades. This rehearsal gives your now awake brain a chance to encode the memory properly. But if you simply roll over and go back to sleep, or immediately start thinking about your day, the dream slips away. Your brain, it seems, treats dreams as temporary theater, meant to be experienced in the moment, rather than archived for later review. What happens to the brain when we sleep? Sleep might look like rest, but your brain remains remarkably busy through the night. Sleep cycles through several stages, each with distinct brain activity patterns. In light sleep, brain waves slow down as you drift away from waking consciousness, though you can still be easily roused. Deeper non-REM sleep brings slow, synchronized waves rolling through the cortex like a gentle tide. During these stages, your brain consolidates memories, moving information from temporary storage in the hippocampus to more permanent locations in the cortex. It's also cleaning time. The glymphatic system becomes more active, flushing out metabolic waste products that accumulated during your waking hours, including proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease. Then comes REM sleep, where your eyes dance behind closed lids and dreams bloom. Brain activity spikes to near waking levels, but in different patterns. Emotional processing happens here, and certain types of learning get reinforced. Throughout the night, you cycle through these stages multiple times, spending more time in deep sleep early on and more in REM sleep toward morning. This architecture isn't random. Each stage serves specific functions. Your sleeping brain is maintaining itself, organizing itself, and preparing you for another day of consciousness. Why is sleep so important for the brain? Without sleep, your brain slowly falls apart. Sleep is when maintenance happens, when the day's wear and tear gets repaired. During waking hours, your neurons fire constantly, consuming energy, generating waste products, forming new connections. This activity is essential, but messy. Sleep provides the downtime needed for cleanup and consolidation. During deep sleep, the glymphatic system kicks into high gear, flushing toxins from brain tissue. Cerebrospinal fluid flows more freely through neural tissue, carrying away metabolic debris, including beta amyloid, a protein that accumulates in Alzheimer's disease. This cleansing can't happen as efficiently while you're awake. Sleep also consolidates memories, replaying the day's experiences so they can be properly stored, deciding what's worth keeping and what can be discarded. It regulates emotional stability. Even one night of poor sleep makes the amygdala, your emotional center, hyperreactive while weakening prefrontal control. Over time, chronic sleep deprivation is linked to increased risk of depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. Sleep isn't a luxury or a waste of time. It's when your brain performs essential maintenance that keeps you thinking, feeling, and functioning properly. Skimp on sleep, and you're shortchanging the very organ that makes you you. What happens when you don't sleep enough? The effects begin subtle and accumulate quickly. After one night of poor sleep, your prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and complex thinking, becomes less efficient. You're more distractible, more irritable, and more likely to make mistakes. Your amygdala, the emotional center, becomes hyperactive, overreacting to minor stresses. After several nights, memory formation suffers noticeably. Your hippocampus struggles to encode new information properly, making learning difficult. Reaction times slow, attention wavers, and you might experience microsleeps, brief moments where your brain simply shuts off for a few seconds, potentially dangerous if you're driving. Chronic sleep deprivation compounds these effects. Waste products accumulate in brain tissue because the glymphatic system hasn't had enough time to flush them out. Inflammation increases throughout the nervous system. The blood-brain barrier becomes more permeable, allowing substances in that normally would be kept out. Over months and years, insufficient sleep is associated with increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases, mood disorders, and cognitive decline. Your brain, remarkable as it is, needs rest. Pushing through on minimal sleep might feel productive in the moment, but you're borrowing against your brain's future at a steep interest rate. How does the brain control the body? Your brain is the conductor of your body's orchestra, sending commands through an extensive communication network. The primary pathway is the nervous system, electrical signals traveling along nerves like messages through telegraph wires. The brain stem, the ancient core at your brain's base, handles automatic functions, breathing, heartbeat, blood pressure, without conscious thought. Your cerebellum coordinates balance and smooth movements. The motor cortex, a strip running across the top of your brain, sends voluntary movement commands. When you decide to pick up a cup, Neurons in your motor cortex fire in a specific pattern, sending signals down your spinal cord and out through motor neurons to the precise muscles needed. But control isn't just electrical. Your brain also uses chemical messengers through the endocrine system, commanding glands to release hormones that influence everything from metabolism to mood. The hypothalamus, a small region deep in your brain, serves as a bridge between nervous and hormonal control, regulating hunger, thirst, temperature, and sleep-wake cycles. Your brain monitors your body constantly through sensory feedback, adjusting its commands in real time. This two-way conversation, brain to brain, happens ceaselessly, allowing you to navigate the world smoothly. How does the brain process emotions? Emotions aren't abstract feelings floating free. They're physical, rooted in specific brain circuits. The limbic system, a collection of structures deep in your brain, plays a central role. The amygdala, small and almond-shaped, acts as an emotional alarm, particularly for fear and threat detection. When you encounter something potentially dangerous, your amygdala can trigger a fear response within milliseconds, faster than conscious awareness. The anterior cingulate cortex monitors emotional conflicts, the discomfort when your feelings clash with your intentions. The insula generates feelings about your body's internal state, creating the physical sensations of emotion, the flutter of anxiety, the warmth of affection. But emotions aren't just limbic. Your prefrontal cortex, the reasoning center, regulates and interprets emotional responses, providing context and control. This is why you can feel angry, but choose not to yell, or feel afraid, but recognize the fear is irrational. Neurotransmitters color the emotional landscape. Serotonin influences mood stability. Dopamine drives motivation and reward. Norepinephrine heightens arousal and attention. Your brain creates emotion through a conversation between ancient survival circuits and modern reasoning centers, between rapid unconscious reactions and slower conscious understanding. Emotions emerge from this dynamic whole brain process. What part of the brain controls fear? The amygdala sits at the center of your fear response. Two small almond-shaped structures buried deep in each temporal lobe. When you encounter a potential threat, a snake on the path, a sudden loud noise, a stranger approaching in darkness, sensory information reaches your amygdala through two routes. The fast route is direct and unconscious, allowing the amygdala to trigger a fear response within milliseconds, before you're consciously aware of danger. This is why you jump before you realize what startled you. The slower route passes through cortical regions that provide context and detail, letting you consciously assess whether the threat is real. If the amygdala decides danger is present, it orchestrates a cascade of responses. It signals the hypothalamus to activate the sympathetic nervous system, releasing adrenaline. Your heart pounds, breathing quickens, muscles tense, preparing you to fight or flee. It also communicates with memory systems, which is why fearful experiences are often vividly remembered. Interestingly, the prefrontal cortex can dampen amygdala activity, which is how you can rationalize fear away or learn through experience that something isn't actually dangerous. Phobias may involve an overactive amygdala or an underactive prefrontal brake. Your fear isn't just one structure, but a circuit. How does the brain make us feel happy? Happiness emerges from several interconnected brain systems, working in concert. The ventral striatum, including a region called the nucleus accumbens, responds to rewards and pleasures. When something good happens, you taste delicious food, receive a compliment, accomplish a goal. This region releases dopamine, creating feelings of pleasure and motivation. The prefrontal cortex evaluates whether outcomes meet expectations, generating satisfaction when they do. The anterior cingulate can produce that warm glow of contentment when conflicts resolve. But happiness isn't just about momentary pleasure. Lasting well-being involves the prefrontal cortex's ability to maintain perspective, to contextualize setbacks, and appreciate positive aspects of life. Serotonin, a neurotransmitter distributed widely through the brain, influences baseline mood. with higher levels generally associated with greater stability and contentment. Endorphins, released during exercise or laughter, create brief euphoria. Oxytocin, flowing during social bonding, generates feelings of connection and trust. What's fascinating is that your brain predicts what will make you happy and often gets it wrong. We adapt quickly to positive changes, a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. The raise you thought would bring lasting joy provides a brief spike before you return to baseline. The brain constantly recalibrates its happiness set point, forever chasing the next reward. What is dopamine, and why do we crave it? Dopamine often gets simplified as the pleasure chemical, but it's more accurately the wanting chemical, the neurological currency of motivation and anticipation. When you expect a reward, the anticipation before biting into cake, the moment before opening a gift, the thrill of approaching a goal, dopamine surges in certain brain circuits, particularly from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens. This creates a feeling of desire, of drive, of "I need to get that." Interestingly, dopamine spikes more in anticipation than in the actual receipt of the reward. It's the promise of pleasure rather than pleasure itself. This is why wanting something often feels more intense than having it. We crave dopamine because it feels like progress towards something good. Our brains evolved this system to motivate behaviors essential for survival, seeking food, water, mates, and social connection. But the system can be hijacked. Drugs, gambling, social media likes. These trigger dopamine release in ways evolution never prepared us for, creating cravings that feel urgent even when they don't serve our well-being. The modern world is full of supernormal stimuli that light up our dopamine circuits far more intensely than natural rewards. We crave dopamine because our brains interpret it as the pursuit of what we need to thrive. How does the brain handle stress? Stress begins as a signal that something demands your attention. Your brain's hypothalamus receives information about a challenge, a deadline, a conflict, a threat, and activates the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal. The hypothalamus releases a hormone that travels to the pituitary gland, which then signals the adrenal glands atop your kidneys to release cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Cortisol floods your system, increasing glucose availability for energy, suppressing non-essential functions like digestion and reproduction, and heightening alertness. In short bursts, this is adaptive. Stress helps you meet challenges. Your prefrontal cortex remains engaged, allowing you to plan and problem solve. But chronic stress changes the equation. Prolonged cortisol exposure can damage the hippocampus, impairing memory and learning. It can shrink dendrites in the prefrontal cortex, reducing your ability to regulate emotions and make decisions. Meanwhile, the amygdala can become hyperactive, making you more reactive to potential threats. Chronic stress also reduces neuroplasticity and can even decrease the production of new neurons in the hippocampus. Your brain handles acute stress well. It's designed for that, but it struggles with the constant, unrelenting pressure of modern life, where stressors rarely have clear resolutions and the stress response never fully shuts off. What happens in the brain during anxiety? Anxiety is fear's persistent cousin, a state of heightened anticipation of potential threats that may or may not arrive. In the anxious brain, the amygdala becomes overactive, seeing danger in ambiguous situations. It's like a smoke alarm that goes off when you're just making toast, technically functioning, but with the sensitivity turned up too high. The prefrontal cortex, which normally provides perspective and dampens amygdala activity, shows reduced connectivity with the amygdala during anxiety. This means the rational brake on fear responses isn't working efficiently. Meanwhile, the anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors for conflict and errors, becomes hyperactive, creating a constant sense that something is wrong or that you've made a mistake. The insula, processing bodily sensations, amplifies awareness of heart rate, breathing, and muscle tension, making physical symptoms of anxiety more noticeable, which can create a feedback loop where noticing anxiety symptoms increases anxiety. Neurotransmitter balance shifts. GABA, which calms neural activity, may be less effective, while glutamate, which excites neurons, may be elevated. The default mode network, active during rest and rumination, can become stuck in loops of worry. Anxiety is exhausting because your brain is constantly running emergency protocols for threats that aren't immediate, draining resources meant for challenges that are actually present. Can the brain heal from trauma? Trauma leaves marks on the brain, but those marks aren't necessarily permanent. When someone experiences severe trauma, the experience can alter brain structure and function in measurable ways. The amygdala becomes hyperreactive, constantly scanning for danger. The hippocampus, responsible for contextualizing memories, may shrink or function less efficiently, which explains why traumatic memories often feel timeless and present rather than safely in the past. The prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate emotional responses may weaken, but here's the hopeful part. The brain's plasticity means healing is possible. Effective therapy helps create new neural pathways that provide alternative responses to trauma-related triggers. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing EMDR helps the brain reprocess traumatic memories, integrating them properly so they become ordinary memories rather than constantly relived experiences. Cognitive behavioral therapy strengthens prefrontal regulation of emotional responses. Meditation and mindfulness practices can reduce amygdala reactivity and increase hippocampal volume. Social connection and safety provide the conditions under which the brain feels secure enough to change. Healing isn't forgetting or erasing trauma. It's integrating the experience in a way that no longer dominates your present. The brain can learn that the danger has passed and adapt accordingly, slowly, with support and time. How does the brain age over time? Your brain changes throughout your life, and age brings both losses and surprising gains. Starting around your mid-20s, you begin losing neurons, though not as dramatically as once believed. Processing speed gradually slows, signals travel a bit less quickly, and multitasking becomes more difficult. Working memory, the mental scratch pad that holds information temporarily, becomes slightly less efficient. The prefrontal cortex, last to mature, is also among the first to show age-related changes. Some of this is structural. Brain volume decreases slightly, ventricles enlarge, and white matter shows more wear. Blood flow to the brain can decrease, and the production of neurotransmitters declines. But aging isn't all decline. Crystallized intelligence, accumulated knowledge and wisdom often continues improving into your 60s and beyond. Older adults frequently show better emotional regulation and life satisfaction than their younger counterparts. The aging brain compensates, sometimes recruiting additional regions to accomplish tasks that once required fewer resources. Importantly, the rate of aging varies tremendously between individuals based on genetics, lifestyle, education, physical activity, social engagement, and mental stimulation. An active, engaged, 70-year-old brain can outperform a sedentary 40-year-old's in many domains. Aging is inevitable, but cognitive decline isn't uniform or unavoidable. Can we slow down brain aging? The encouraging answer is yes, significantly. While you can't stop time, lifestyle choices profoundly influence how your brain ages. Physical exercise is among the most powerful interventions. Aerobic activity increases blood flow to the brain, stimulates the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which supports neuron survival and growth, and promotes neurogenesis in the hippocampus. Regular exercisers show less age-related brain shrinkage and better cognitive performance. Cognitive engagement matters too. Learning new skills, particularly those that are complex and challenging, builds cognitive reserve essentially creating a buffer against age-related decline. Social connection protects the aging brain. Isolation accelerates cognitive decline, while meaningful relationships provide mental stimulation and emotional support. Diet plays a role as well. Mediterranean-style diets, rich in omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants, and whole foods are associated with better brain health. Sleep becomes even more crucial with age, as waste clearance through the lymphatic system helps prevent protein accumulation. Managing cardiovascular health, blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, directly impacts brain health, since what's good for the heart is good for the brain. Stress management and mindfulness practices can reduce inflammation and protect the hippocampus. The brain you have at 70 depends significantly on how you've lived between 30 and 70. You're not passive in your brain's aging. You're an active participant. What happens to the brain in Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's is a gradual unraveling of the brain's architecture, beginning years before symptoms appear. It starts with the accumulation of two abnormal proteins, beta amyloid, which forms plaques outside neurons, and tau, which creates tangles inside them. These proteins disrupt cellular function and communication between neurons. The disease typically begins in the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex, regions critical for forming new memories, which explains why early symptoms involve forgetting recent events, while distant memories remain clear. As the disease progresses, it spreads through the cortex in a predictable pattern, affecting language, reasoning, spatial awareness, and eventually basic functions. Neurons die, synapses disappear, and brain tissue atrophies, visibly on scans. The brain literally shrinks as ventricles expand into space, once occupied by healthy tissue. Inflammation increases as the brain's immune cells try unsuccessfully to clear the abnormal proteins. What makes Alzheimer's particularly cruel is that it erodes the self, memories that define identity, the ability to recognize loved ones, eventually even awareness itself. We still don't fully understand what triggers the protein accumulation, though age is the greatest risk factor, along with genetics, cardiovascular health, and lifestyle factors. Research continues seeking ways to prevent or slow this devastating disease. How does the brain create consciousness? This is perhaps the deepest mystery in neuroscience, maybe in all of science. How does 3 pounds of tissue generate the felt experience of being? We know certain brain regions are essential. The thalamus relays sensory information. The cortex processes it into coherent perception. Networks like the default mode create a sense of ongoing self. We know that consciousness correlates with specific patterns of neural activity, with certain brain waves, with communication between distant regions. But correlation isn't explanation. The hard problem of consciousness, as philosopher David Chalmers called it, is explaining why there's something it's like to be you. Why doesn't your brain simply process information in the dark, like a computer, without generating subjective experience? Some theories suggest consciousness emerges from integrated information. When different brain regions communicate in complex, interconnected ways, subjective experience arises as an emergent property. Others propose that consciousness is fundamental to the universe, and brains don't create it so much as tune into it. Still others argue we're asking the wrong question, that consciousness is an illusion created by the brain's tendency to construct narratives. The honest truth is, we don't know. Your brain creates your experience of reading these words right now through mechanisms we can measure, but not fully explain. What does it mean to be self-aware? Self-awareness is the brain's ability to take itself as an object of thought, to know that it knows. It's the difference between experiencing and experiencing. This capacity seems to rely heavily on the prefrontal cortex and specific regions like the anterior cingulate and insula. When you recognize yourself in a mirror, something only a few species can do, you're demonstrating self-awareness. When you think about your own thinking, monitoring whether you're understanding something or need to reread it, that's metacognition, a form of self-awareness. The default mode network active during rest and introspection, creates a sense of continuous self across time, connecting who you were yesterday with who you are now and who you'll be tomorrow. This narrative self is partly illusion. The you, from moment to moment, is actually slightly different configurations of neural activity, but the illusion is functional, allowing you to plan, learn from past mistakes, and maintain a coherent identity. Some meditation practices aim to see through this illusion, to experience consciousness without the usual sense of a separate self observing it. Self-awareness isn't binary. It exists on a spectrum from basic bodily awareness to sophisticated reflection on one's own beliefs and biases. It's what allows you to change yourself deliberately. Is the mind separate from the brain? This question has troubled philosophers for centuries. Dualism, the idea that mind and brain are separate substances, was championed by Descartes. The immaterial mind, somehow interacting with the physical brain. Modern neuroscience strongly suggests otherwise. Every aspect of mind we can measure corresponds to brain activity. Damage specific brain regions, and specific mental capacities disappear. Alter brain chemistry with drugs and consciousness changes. Stimulate neurons electrically, and you can trigger memories, emotions, even the feeling of a divine presence. There's no evidence of mental activity without corresponding neural activity. The brain appears sufficient to explain the mind, yet something about this explanation feels incomplete. The subjective quality of experience, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, seems categorically different from neural firing patterns. This is the explanatory gap. Most neuroscientists adopt a position of materialism or physicalism. The mind is what the brain does. Mental states are brain states, even if we don't fully understand how physical processes generate subjective experience. A few suggest property dualism. Perhaps consciousness is a fundamental property of certain physical systems, like electromagnetism, rather than reducible to simpler components. The practical answer is that mind and brain are deeply, perhaps inseparably, intertwined. Whether they're ultimately the same thing remains philosophically contentious. How does the brain create imagination? Imagination is the brain running offline, generating experiences without external input. When you imagine biting into a lemon, many of the same sensory regions activate as when you actually do it. Visual areas for the yellow color, taste areas for the sourness, but the signals come from memory and expectation rather than your senses. The hippocampus, which normally encodes actual experiences, can recombine elements of different memories into novel scenarios. The prefrontal cortex coordinates this process, intentionally directing attention to imagined content and suppressing real sensory input. Default mode network activity increases during imagination, particularly regions involved in mental scene construction and perspective taking. What's remarkable is that your brain doesn't clearly distinguish between imagined and real experiences in terms of the regions involved. This is why mental practice, athletes visualizing their performance, musicians imagining playing their instrument, actually improves real-world skills. The same neural pathways get activated and strengthened. Imagination allows your brain to simulate possibilities without risking actual consequences. You can plan, problem solve, consider alternatives, and learn from hypothetical scenarios. It's how you create art, invent tools, and envision futures different from your present. Imagination is your brain's sandbox, where reality's rules can be suspended and recombined in infinite ways. Why can the brain picture things that don't exist? The ability to imagine the non-existent might be humanity's most unique cognitive gift. Your brain constructs reality from sensory input, but the machinery that builds that internal model doesn't require external input to run. You can picture a purple elephant because your brain has templates for purple elephant and rules for combining them, even though the combination never existed in your experience. This capacity emerges from the brain's predictive nature. Your brain constantly generates expectations about what comes next, filling in gaps in sensory data. Imagination is this prediction engine, freed from the constraint of reality. The prefrontal cortex plays a key role, manipulating concepts and memories deliberately, while the hippocampus recombines elements from different experiences. This ability has enormous survival value. It allows you to plan for situations you've never encountered, to create tools for problems you've never faced, to consider what-if scenarios that help you avoid danger. It's also the foundation of human culture. Every invention, story, artwork, and scientific theory began as something pictured in someone's brain that didn't yet exist in the world. The cost of this ability is that we can also imagine horrors, can worry about futures that never arrive, can be haunted by scenarios that exist only in our minds. How does creativity work in the brain? Creativity emerges from an intricate dance between different brain networks that are typically at odds. The default mode network, active during daydreaming and mind wandering, generates associations and spontaneous ideas. The executive control network, centered in the prefrontal cortex, evaluates those ideas and implements them. Creative thinking requires both generation and evaluation, divergence and convergence. Neuroscience studies of creative people show flexible switching between these networks. During brainstorming or free association, the default mode dominates, while the executive network relaxes its constraints, allowing unusual connections to form. During refinement and execution, the executive network engages to shape raw ideas into finished products. The temporal lobes contribute by storing and retrieving the knowledge base from which new combinations emerge. Interestingly, mild disinhibition of the prefrontal cortex through relaxation, walking, or the edge of sleep often enhances creativity by reducing the critical voice that dismisses ideas too quickly. This is why solutions often arrive in the shower or just before sleep. Dopamine plays a role too, particularly in the openness to new experiences and the motivation to create. Creative individuals often show increased connectivity between brain regions that don't typically communicate, allowing concepts from different domains to merge in novel ways. Creativity is structured spontaneity, controlled chaos, the brain at its most flexibly integrated. Can we train our brains to be more creative? Yes, though not in the simple, direct way we might train a muscle. Creativity isn't one skill, but a collection of cognitive capacities that can be developed. Divergent thinking, generating multiple solutions to open-ended problems, improves with practice. Simply spending time brainstorming, without judgment, strengthens the neural pathways involved. Exposing yourself to diverse experiences and knowledge domains provides more material for your brain to recombine in novel ways. Learning across different fields, music and mathematics, art and science, creates unexpected connections. Mindfulness meditation can reduce the prefrontal cortex's inhibitory control, allowing more spontaneous associations while maintaining awareness. Physical exercise increases BDNF and neuroplasticity, creating conditions favorable for new connections. Sleep, particularly REM sleep, facilitates the kind of loose association that generates creative insights. Some evidence suggests that environmental factors matter too. Natural settings, relaxed atmospheres, and playful moods all seem to enhance creative thinking. Perhaps most importantly, you can train yourself to notice and nurture creative ideas rather than dismissing them. Keeping an idea journal, following curiosity, allowing time for boredom and mind wandering. These habits give your brain space to create. Creativity isn't magic or purely innate. It's partly skill, partly habit, and always the result of a brain given permission to explore. How does the brain recognize faces? You are a facial recognition expert, though you never studied for it. The fusiform face area, a region in your temporal lobe, specializes in processing faces. When you see a face, this region activates more strongly than for any other visual stimulus. even though faces are just particular arrangements of features. What makes face recognition special is its holistic, configural nature. You don't process faces as collections of parts, two eyes, a nose, a mouth, but as integrated wholes. This is why faces turned upside down become dramatically harder to recognize. You lose the configural processing and must rely on features. Your brain analyzes multiple aspects simultaneously: the spacing between eyes, the shape of the jaw, the curve of the smile. It's extraordinarily sensitive to these configurations, able to distinguish thousands of individual faces, even though they're all remarkably similar arrangements of the same basic features. Face processing begins within milliseconds and happens largely outside conscious awareness. You can sense someone's emotional state from micro expressions you don't consciously notice. The system is so tuned to faces that you see them in clouds, on Mars, in burnt toast. Pareidolia, the tendency to see faces where none exist. This sensitivity makes evolutionary sense. Recognizing individuals and reading their emotional states is crucial for social animals. Faces aren't just visual stimuli, they're social information, and your brain treats them as such. What happens when the brain makes mistakes? Your brain is brilliant, but not infallible. It makes systematic errors called cognitive biases, shortcuts that usually work, but sometimes lead you astray. Confirmation bias makes you notice evidence supporting what you already believe while overlooking contradictory information. The availability heuristic causes you to judge the probability of events based on how easily examples come to mind, making you overestimate risks of dramatic but rare dangers like plane crashes, while underestimating common ones like car accidents. These aren't flaws exactly, they're features. Your brain evolved to make fast decisions with incomplete information, not to be perfectly logical. Sometimes it fills in gaps incorrectly, like when you see motion in still images or hear a phone notification that didn't happen. Sometimes it misremembers events, confidently recalling details that never occurred. The prefrontal cortex includes error detection systems, particularly the anterior cingulate, which generates that something's wrong feeling when you make a mistake. But these systems aren't perfect either. You can feel certain and be wrong. The brain's confidence in its interpretations doesn't necessarily correlate with accuracy. Understanding this can be humbling, but also liberating. When you recognize that your brain is an imperfect narrator, you can question your assumptions, seek alternative perspectives, and hold beliefs more tentatively. Your mistakes aren't personal failings. They're the inevitable result of a complex system doing its best. Why do we get déjà vu? Déjà vu is that eerie feeling of having experienced something before when you know you haven't. It happens to most people occasionally and might result from a timing glitch in how your brain processes new experiences. One theory suggests that the hippocampus, which marks experiences as memories, misfires briefly, tagging a new experience as familiar before you've consciously registered it as novel. Another proposes that perceptual similarity causes it. The current situation resembles a past one in subtle ways your brain recognizes without conscious awareness, creating a sense of familiarity without a specific memory to anchor it. A third explanation involves divided attention. If you process a scene unconsciously, then consciously attend to it a moment later, the second conscious processing might feel like recognition. Some researchers point to dual processing errors, where the brain's pathways for conscious perception and memory become temporarily unsynchronized. What's clear is that déjà vu involves a mismatch between the feeling of familiarity and actual memory. Your brain's familiarity system says, "I've seen this," while your recollection system says, "No, you haven't." This conflict creates that distinctive, slightly unsettling sensation. Déjà vu is generally harmless, though very frequent episodes can sometimes indicate temporal lobe abnormalities. For most people, it's just an occasional reminder that consciousness is a construction, not a simple recording. What causes the feeling of gut instinct? Gut feelings arise from rapid, unconscious processing that reaches conclusions before your conscious mind catches up. So they're not magical. They're based on pattern recognition accumulated through experience. Your brain constantly processes far more information than reaches conscious awareness. The insula, a region that monitors your body's internal state, plays a key role in gut feelings, translating subtle physiological signals into vague sensations of rightness or wrongness. When you meet someone and feel immediate distrust, your brain may have detected micro-expressions, tone of voice, or behavioral patterns that match stored templates for dishonesty, all below conscious awareness. The feeling emerges before you can articulate why. Gut instincts work best in domains where you have experience. Inexperienced firefighters' intuition about when a building might collapse is based on thousands of subtle cues processed unconsciously. A novice wouldn't have those patterns stored. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex integrates emotional information into decision-making, which is why people with damage to this region struggle with decisions despite intact logic. They lack the gut feelings that normally guide choices. However, gut instincts can be wrong, especially in unfamiliar situations or when influenced by cognitive biases. They're valuable signals worth considering, but not infallible. The key is knowing when to trust intuition and when to slow down for deliberate analysis. How does the brain predict the future? Your brain is a prediction machine, constantly generating expectations about what comes next. This isn't mystical precognition. It's pattern-based forecasting. Every moment, your brain uses past experience to anticipate the immediate future. What word comes next? In this sentence, what your foot will feel like when it touches the ground, what your friend might say based on their expression. This predictive processing is fundamental to perception. Your brain doesn't passively receive sensory data. It actively predicts what it expects to sense, then checks whether reality confirms or contradicts those predictions. When predictions are accurate, processing is efficient. When they're violated, prediction error signals trigger updates to your internal model. The prefrontal cortex specializes in longer-range prediction, planning tomorrow's schedule, anticipating consequences of your decisions, imagining future scenarios. The hippocampus contributes by combining elements from past experiences into possible futures. The cerebellum predicts the sensory consequences of your movements, allowing smooth coordination. These predictions happen at multiple timescales simultaneously, from milliseconds ahead to years ahead. This is why surprises feel surprising. They violate predictions, and why time feels like it speeds up in routine situations where everything unfolds as expected. Your experience of now is actually your brain's best guess about what's happening slightly in the past, updated by current sensory information. You live in your brain's simulation of reality, not reality itself. How do habits form inside the brain? Habits are behaviors that have moved from effortful conscious control to automatic execution through repetition. The formation happens through a process involving the basal ganglia, particularly the striatum. Initially, when you're learning a new behavior, making coffee in the morning, driving a new route, your prefrontal cortex is heavily involved, consciously directing each step. With repetition, a transfer occurs. The behavior becomes chunked into a single routine that can be triggered by a cue without conscious deliberation. The striatum starts encoding the sequence as a unit. Cue triggers routine produces reward. The neural pathways representing the sequence become more efficient, requiring less energy and attention. Eventually, the behavior can run almost entirely outside conscious awareness. This is incredibly useful. Imagine having to consciously decide every micro-movement of walking or deliberately think through every word while speaking. Habits free up your conscious mind for novel challenges, but the same mechanism works for unwanted habits. The striatum doesn't distinguish between good and bad. It just learns what follows what. Once established, habits become encoded in structural changes in the brain, which is why they're so difficult to break. The neural pathways are literally carved deeper. Changing a habit requires overriding these automatic patterns with conscious effort, repeatedly, until new pathways become the default. Can we break bad habits by rewiring our brains? Breaking habits is possible, but requires understanding how they work in your brain. Habits operate on a cue routine reward loop. A cue triggers an automatic routine, which leads to a reward that reinforces the behavior. To break a habit, you can't just will it away. The neural pathways are too well established. Instead, you need to rewire by intervening in the loop. One approach is identifying the cue and avoiding it. If scrolling social media is triggered by boredom, removing the app from your phone eliminates easy access when the cue appears. Another strategy is keeping the cue and reward, but changing the routine. If stress triggers snacking for comfort, you might replace snacking with a walk, maintaining the stress relief reward through a different routine. The most effective approach often involves consistent, conscious override. Each time the cue appears, and you choose a different response, you're weakening the old pathway and strengthening a new one. This requires prefrontal cortex engagement, deliberately choosing the harder new behavior over the easy automatic one. Repetition is crucial. You're essentially training a new habit to replace the old. Neuroplasticity means the brain can form new pathways, but it takes time and consistency. Research suggests 60 to 250 days to automatize a new behavior. The old pathway never completely disappears, which is why recovering addicts can relapse years later. But you can build stronger alternatives that become your new default. How does the brain control movement? Movement begins with intention. In the prefrontal and premotor cortices, where you decide to act. This intention travels to the primary motor cortex, a strip running across the top of your brain with a topographic map of your body. Stimulate one spot, and your thumb twitches. Stimulate another, and your foot moves. Signals from motor cortex travel down through the brain stem and spinal cord, arriving at motor neurons that connect directly to muscle fibers. When these neurons fire, your muscles contract. But movement isn't one way. The basal ganglia help initiate and regulate movement, selecting appropriate motor programs and suppressing inappropriate ones. The cerebellum coordinates timing and precision, constantly comparing intended movement with actual movement and making real-time adjustments. Sensory feedback streams back to the brain continuously. Proprioceptors in your muscles and joints report position and tension, allowing unconscious adjustments. The cerebellum uses this feedback to predict sensory consequences of movements, enabling smooth coordination. For learned skills like playing piano or dribbling a basketball, motor patterns become encoded in the brain, so you don't have to consciously plan each micro-movement. The entire system works as an integrated loop: intention, execution, feedback, adjustment, all happening faster than conscious awareness. When you casually reach for a cup, your brain performs staggeringly complex calculations about distance, trajectory, grip strength, all outside your awareness. What happens when the brain loses coordination? When coordination falters, the usual culprit is damage or dysfunction in the cerebellum, or the pathways connecting it to other brain regions. The cerebellum, though only 10% of brain volume, contains more than half of all neurons, dedicated almost entirely to coordinating movement and maintaining balance. Damage here causes ataxia. Movements become jerky, imprecise, and poorly timed. Reaching for a cup might involve overshooting or trembling. Walking becomes unsteady, with a wide-based gait, to compensate for balance problems. Speech can become slurred because articulation requires precisely timed muscle movements. Diseases like multiple sclerosis, which damages myelin-coating neural pathways, disrupt communication between brain regions, fragmenting the smooth coordination of movement. Stroke affecting motor regions can cause weakness or paralysis, but also coordination loss depending on location. Alcohol intoxication temporarily impairs cerebellar function, which is why you become clumsy and unbalanced when drunk. Parkinson's disease affects the basal ganglia, causing tremors, rigidity, and difficulty initiating movement. What these conditions reveal is how much coordination we normally take for granted. The seamless integration of intention, execution, feedback, and adjustment requires vast neural infrastructure working in concert. When any part fails, the elegant flow of movement fragments into effortful conscious struggle. Coordination isn't one thing, but an achievement of many systems working together. Why do some people have faster reflexes? Reflex speed varies based on multiple factors, some genetic, some developed. The simplest reflexes, like jerking your hand from a hot surface, don't involve conscious processing at all. The signal travels from sensory neurons to spinal cord and back to motor neurons without reaching the brain. But even these vary between individuals based on nerve conduction velocity, influenced by how well myelinated their neurons are. Some people naturally have better myelination, allowing faster signal transmission. For more complex reactions requiring brain processing, catching a ball, swerving while driving, speed depends on processing efficiency in relevant brain regions and the strength of connections between them. Athletes who train specific reactions develop stronger, more efficient neural pathways for those responses. A baseball player's brain learns to predict pitch trajectory from tiny cues, preparing the motor response before conscious awareness catches up. Attention matters too. A focused mind responds faster than a distracted one because relevant neural networks are already primed. Age affects reflex speed. Children and young adults typically have faster reflexes than older adults due to more efficient neural processing and faster nerve conduction. Stimulants like caffeine can temporarily enhance reaction time by increasing neural excitability. Ultimately, reflex speed reflects the efficiency of your sensory to motor neural pathways and how well practiced those specific reactions are. Genetics provides the foundation, but experience shapes the structure. How does the brain understand language? Language processing involves a distributed network across your brain, though two regions are particularly crucial. Broca's area in the left frontal lobe handles speech production and grammatical processing. Damage here causes Broca's aphasia. People understand language, but struggle to form coherent sentences, speaking in telegraphic fragments. Wernicke's area in the left temporal lobe processes language comprehension. Damage here causes fluent but nonsensical speech, an inability to understand what others say. But language involves far more than these regions. When you hear a word, auditory cortex processes the sound. Then pathways connect to Wernicke's area for meaning. Visual cortex activates if you're reading. Motor cortex engages when you speak or write. Crucially, meaning isn't isolated. Hearing the word apple activates sensory memories of apples. Color and visual cortex, taste and gustatory regions, memories of eating them. Language connects to your entire experiential network. Grammar processing involves the basal ganglia and cerebellum, not just cortical language areas. The right hemisphere contributes prosody, sarcasm, metaphor, the aspects of language beyond literal meaning. Children's brains show remarkable plasticity for language acquisition. The left hemisphere typically specializes for language, but if damaged early, the right can compensate. Adult brains are less flexible, but still capable of learning new languages, building new neural pathways through practice and repetition. Language is uniquely human, and understanding how the brain accomplishes it remains one of neuroscience's great puzzles. What happens when you learn a new language? Learning a new language involves creating and strengthening neural pathways for sounds, words, grammar, meanings that initially seem foreign. In your brain, bilingualism changes structure measurably. The left inferior parietal cortex, involved in language processing, shows increased gray matter density in people who speak multiple languages. Early bilinguals, who learned two languages as children, showed different neural organization than late bilinguals, who learned a second language after childhood. Children's brains integrate new languages into existing networks more seamlessly, while adults often process second languages alongside their first, requiring more executive control from the prefrontal cortex to suppress the native language and access the new one. Learning a language strengthens the connections between auditory regions that process speech sounds and memory systems that store vocabulary. Grammar learning involves the basal ganglia and cerebellum, which handle sequential processing and rule application. Initially, language learning is effortful, heavily engaging prefrontal regions for conscious processing. With practice, it becomes more automatic, shifting to more specialized language regions. What's fascinating is that multilingualism appears to enhance executive function, task switching, attention control, working memory, perhaps because constantly managing multiple languages exercises these cognitive systems. Learning a new language doesn't just add information, it restructures your brain, creating new connections and strengthening cognitive control systems. The effort is real, but so is the neural benefit. How does the brain process music? Music engages your brain more extensively than almost any other activity. Listening to music involves auditory cortex processing sound frequencies and patterns, but it spreads from there. The motor cortex activates even when you're sitting still, simulating the movements that would produce those sounds. The cerebellum tracks rhythm and timing. The hippocampus and prefrontal cortex connect music to memories. Why a particular song can transport you instantly to a specific moment in your past. The emotional centers, including the amygdala and nucleus accumbens, respond to musical tension and resolution, creating feelings of pleasure when a chord progression resolves satisfyingly. The corpus callosum, connecting left and right hemispheres, shows increased activity during music processing as both sides communicate. The left handling rhythmic and linguistic aspects, the right handling melody and pitch. Musicians' brains show structural differences from non-musicians. Increased gray matter in motor and auditory regions, stronger connections between hemispheres, enhanced auditory discrimination abilities. Learning an instrument creates some of the most complex neural integration possible, requiring simultaneous coordination of motor execution, auditory monitoring, reading notation, and emotional expression. Music activates the reward system similarly to food, sex, and drugs, releasing dopamine during peak emotional moments. Music might be evolutionarily ancient, possibly predating language, which could explain why it's so deeply wired into our neural architecture. Why does music trigger memories? Music and memory are intimately connected in your brain's architecture. The hippocampus, crucial for memory formation, sits adjacent to auditory processing regions, and music provides a particularly rich encoding context. When you experience something while music plays, the music becomes woven into the memory trace. Later, hearing that music reactivates the entire network, bringing back not just facts but feelings, sensations, and context from that time. Music is especially effective because it engages emotion strongly, and emotional experiences are remembered more vividly. The amygdala, which processes emotion, tags emotionally significant events for stronger encoding, which is why music from emotionally intense periods, first love, high school, traumatic events, can trigger such powerful recall. Music also has structure, rhythm, melody, harmony, that provides a framework for organizing memories, like a mental filing system. Remarkably, musical memory often remains intact, even when other memory systems fail. Alzheimer's patients, who struggle to recognize family members, can sometimes sing songs from their youth. This may be because musical memory involves different neural pathways than episodic memory, particularly in the cerebellum and motor systems, regions less affected by early Alzheimer's pathology. Music reaches deep into the brain's memory systems, touching both explicit memories you can describe and implicit emotional memories you feel without words. A few notes can open a door to your past. Can music heal the brain? Music shows genuine therapeutic potential for various neurological conditions. After stroke, melodic intonation therapy helps patients with speech difficulties by having them sing words first, engaging right hemisphere regions that can compensate for damaged left hemisphere language areas. Rhythm and movement-based music therapy helps Parkinson's patients improve gait and reduce freezing episodes. The external rhythm provides a cue that compensates for damaged internal timing systems in the basal ganglia. For dementia patients, music therapy can temporarily improve mood, reduce agitation, and access memories that seemed lost, providing moments of connection and lucidity. Music training in children is associated with enhanced language development, better executive function, and improved academic performance, suggesting it strengthens developing neural networks. Even for healthy brains, music provides benefits, reducing stress hormones, increasing pain tolerance through endorphin release, improving mood through dopamine activation. The mechanisms aren't fully understood, but music engages so many brain systems simultaneously: emotion, motor, memory, attention, reward, that it creates multiple pathways for therapeutic intervention. Music isn't a cure-all, but it's a powerful tool precisely because it speaks the brain's language of pattern, emotion, and rhythm. It offers a unique way to reach neural systems that may not respond as well to verbal or physical therapies alone. The brain seems built to respond to music. What happens during meditation? Meditation produces measurable changes in brain activity, and with sustained practice, brain structure. During focused attention meditation, where you concentrate on breath or a mantra, prefrontal regions involved in attention control become more active, while the default mode network that generates mind-wandering quiets. You're strengthening the neural circuits for sustained attention and weakening the tendency toward distraction. In open monitoring meditation, where you observe thoughts without attachment, the insula and anterior cingulate show increased activity, regions involved in interoception and monitoring. You're training the brain to notice mental events without getting caught up in them. Loving kindness meditation activates regions involved in empathy and emotional processing, potentially shifting baseline emotional tone. The brain wave patterns change too, typically showing increased alpha and theta waves associated with relaxed but alert states. During very deep meditation, experienced practitioners show gamma wave activity associated with high-level cognitive integration. What happens during meditation depends on the specific technique, but common threads include reduced activity in the default mode's rumination networks, increased attention control from prefrontal regions, and enhanced awareness of present moment experience. These aren't just temporary states. They're practice sessions for specific mental capacities. Each session strengthens the neural infrastructure for attention, awareness, and equanimity. How does mindfulness change brain structure? Long-term mindfulness practice produces structural changes visible on brain scans. Studies of experienced meditators show increased gray matter density in several regions. The hippocampus, crucial for learning and memory, and typically atrophied in depression and PTSD, shows increased volume in meditators. The temporoparietal junction, involved in perspective taking and empathy, becomes thicker. The prefrontal cortex regions, involved in attention control and emotional regulation, show enhanced development. Conversely, the amygdala, which processes stress and fear, often shows reduced volume in long-term meditators, corresponding to decreased stress reactivity. These aren't just correlations from self-selecting populations. Longitudinal studies show that 8 weeks of mindfulness-based stress reduction produces measurable changes in brain structure in previously non-meditating participants. The changes correlate with psychological improvements, reduced anxiety, better focus, improved emotional regulation. White matter connectivity also changes, particularly in pathways connecting prefrontal cortex to emotion processing regions, suggesting improved top-down emotional regulation. The mechanism is likely neuroplasticity. Consistent, repeated practice of attention and awareness strengthens those neural systems the same way. Lifting weights strengthens muscles. What you practice, you become, not metaphorically, but literally, in the physical structure of your brain. Mindfulness might be the most direct way we have to deliberately reshape our brains toward greater well-being. Can thoughts change the physical brain? Yes. Remarkably. Your thoughts are physical events, patterns of neural activity, and repeated patterns change the brain's physical structure through neuroplasticity. This isn't mystical, it's mechanistic. When you think about something repeatedly, you're repeatedly activating specific neural circuits. This repeated activation strengthens synaptic connections between those neurons, following the principle that cells that fire together wire together. Mental practice produces measurable changes. Studies show that imagining playing piano produces similar structural changes in motor cortex as actual piano practice, though smaller in magnitude. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which changes thought patterns, produces observable changes in prefrontal and limbic regions and successfully treats depression and anxiety. Rumination, repeatedly thinking negative thoughts, strengthens those negative neural pathways and is a risk factor for depression. This works both ways. The brain shapes thoughts, and thoughts shape the brain in an ongoing feedback loop. Affirmations work not through magic, but through this mechanism. Repeatedly thinking positive thoughts about yourself strengthens those neural patterns, making them more accessible and automatic. Critically, just as physical changes require consistent physical training, mental changes require consistent mental practice. Occasional positive thoughts won't rewire deeply entrenched negative patterns, but sustained, deliberate practice of new ways of thinking can genuinely reshape your brain's default patterns. Your thoughts are both products of your brain and sculptors of it. How does the brain create pain and stop it? Pain isn't simply a message from your body. It's a construction by your brain. When you injure tissue, nociceptors, specialized neurons, detect damage and send signals to the spinal cord and then to the brain. But the brain doesn't just passively receive this information. It interprets it, creating the experience of pain based on multiple factors: the signal's intensity, the context, your emotional state, past experiences, and expectations. This is why pain varies so much between individuals and situations. A paper cut hurts more when you're stressed. Soldiers in combat sometimes don't notice serious injuries until the battle ends. Your brain has powerful pain modulation systems. The periaqueductal gray in the midbrain can send descending signals that block pain signals at the spinal cord level, which is partly how placebo effects work. Belief that pain will decrease triggers these endogenous pain control systems. Endorphins, the brain's natural opioids, bind to receptors and reduce pain signaling. The prefrontal cortex can modulate pain through attention and reappraisal. Chronic pain often involves reduced prefrontal control and amplified activity in pain processing regions. Conversely, the brain can generate pain without tissue damage.